If you're walking into a Netflix interview without having read one specific book, you are walking in blind, and today we're going to fix that.
Yeah, and it's not a trick. Netflix interviewers are explicit about it. The book is essentially the rubric for every behavioral question you're going to face.
The book is No Rules Rules. Read Hastings and Erin Meyer. Give me the one-paragraph version of what it's actually arguing.
So most companies, as they grow, add rules to prevent mistakes. Approval chains, policies, sign-offs, and Hastings' argument is that yes, that prevents errors, but it also prevents the high upside moves that come from giving people real latitude. For creative and knowledge work, that trade-off is a losing one.
So instead of rules, what?
Instead of rules, you build a workforce so dense with talent and a culture so candid that people can be trusted to act without rules. And when they misfire, the candor surfaces it fast enough to correct. Talent density and candor are the foundation. Freedom and responsibility are what they make possible.
And he's very specific that you can't just start by tearing up the rule book.
Exactly. He's emphatic about this. It's a layered system. You have to build the prerequisites in the right order or you get chaos. Each chapter follows the same pattern. Build something up, then remove the rule that thing makes unnecessary.
Walk me through the layers. Where does it start?
It starts with a story from the 2001 dot-com bust. Netflix had to lay off a third of their staff. Everyone expected a productivity collapse. Instead, the remaining team was happier and shipped more.
Because the people who left were the weaker performers.
Right. Hastings' interpretation was that they weren't bad people, they were adequate. And adequate people, surrounded by other adequate people, dilute the stars. That insight shaped everything.
And the operational consequence of that is pretty brutal, right?
The canonical line is, adequate performance gets a generous severance package. The mechanism is the keeper test. Every manager is supposed to regularly ask themselves, if this person told me they were leaving for a competitor, would I fight hard to keep them? If the answer is no, they should be replaced with someone you would fight to keep.
That sounds cold. How does Netflix defend it?
The counter-argument is that stringing someone along behind performance improvement plans and corrective feedback is the actual cruelty. A generous severance with honest information about why the fit was wrong gives the person agency. Netflix uses the metaphor of a sports team rather than a family.
A family loves you unconditionally. A team plays you while you're the best fit.
Exactly. And the book is upfront that the metaphor has costs. Some former Netflix employees describe the keeper test culture as anxiety-inducing, this constant sense of being on probation.
So for the interview, you can't just say, I love the sports team model, and leave it there.
No, that's the wrong move. The interviewer is testing whether you can hold the trade-off honestly. The better answer is something like, I find the model energizing, I'm clear-eyed about the anxiety it can produce, and I think the antidote is the candor layer. If I always know clearly where I stand, the keeper test becomes a feature, not a threat.
Okay, let's talk about that candor layer, because this is the one that tends to make people either very excited or very uncomfortable.
Right. So talent density without candor gives you a room full of high performers competing instead of compounding. The framework Netflix uses is the 4A model, 4 principles for giving and receiving feedback.
Hit me.
Aim to assist. The feedback serves the recipient's growth, not your own frustration. Actionable. You tell them specifically what to do differently. Appreciate. On the receiving end, your first move is gratitude, not defensiveness. And accept or discard. Once received, the recipient decides what to do with it.
That last one surprised me. They're not saying you have to act on every piece of feedback.
No, and that's important. It's not a compliance model. You own the decision about what to keep, but you owe the person who took the risk to tell you an honest reception.
And Netflix actually institutionalizes this. It's not just a framework that sits in a slide deck somewhere.
They do live 360s, sometimes around a dinner table, every member of the team giving every other member named feedback in real time, and written 360s that are signed, not anonymous. You own your feedback publicly.
That is a significant departure from most corporate 360 processes, which are deliberately anonymous, precisely so people will be honest.
Netflix's bet is the opposite, that anonymity actually reduces honesty because it removes accountability for the quality of the feedback. When your name is on it, you have to be fair.
Okay, once you've built talent density and candor, what's the first rule that comes off?
The vacation policy. No formal allotment, no approval, no tracking. take what you need.
Which sounds like a perk, but you're saying that's the wrong way to read it in an interview.
Completely wrong framing. The interviewer is testing whether you understand the mechanism. The policy only works because leaders visibly model taking vacation. If they don't, nobody takes any and it becomes a sham. The vacation policy is symbolic. It's the first demonstration that Netflix is not bluffing about its operating philosophy.
If you talk about it as a benefit rather than a system, you've shown you didn't read the argument.
Exactly right.
Act 2 raises the stakes considerably, starting with pay.
Netflix pays each person at the very top of their market. They call it the rock star principle. The argument is that in creative work, one brilliant person is worth 10 or 15 merely good ones, so you should pay them 10 to 15 times more rather than spreading the same payroll across a bigger adequate team.
And they actually encourage employees to take recruiter calls and bring back competing offers,
which most companies treat as disloyalty. Netflix treats it as market signal. There are no performance bonuses either. The argument is that bonuses distort focus toward whatever they're measured on, and creative work requires latitude to chase the unexpected.
Then they open the books, which is the layer that seems most counterintuitive to me.
Netflix shares strategy decks, financial performance, executive memos, broadly and earlier than most companies would. The bet is that the upside of informed employees making better decisions outweighs the downside of occasional leaks.
And Hastings is honest that the leaks have happened.
He is. His position is that uninformed employees making decisions based on guesses produces far more aggregate damage than the leaks do. Same logic applies to bad news. If a project fails, it gets discussed openly, not buried behind PR language.
For people coming from finance or healthcare or defense, where information control is baked into the compliance infrastructure, this one is a real inflection point in the interview.
Right. The wrong answer is I would push back on the openness. The right answer is I understand why we default to open, and I would look for the narrow categories where openness creates a real legal or safety risk and design exceptions there, while preserving the default.
Then we get to what I think is the most operationally rich principle in the whole book: lead with context, not control.
This is the central operating principle for senior management at Netflix. Instead of approving decisions, leaders set the context within which their teams decide. The decision maker is whoever's closest to the issue with the most relevant information. They call that person the informed captain.
And before the informed captain makes a big call, they farm for dissent.
Actively seek out people who disagree. Circulate a memo that explicitly invites pushback. Sometimes there's a shared document where every objection is logged. Then once the dissent has been farmed and the call is made, the expectation is disagree and commit. Disagreement before the decision, full alignment after.
The book gives a specific example of this working at a pretty high-stakes level.
A junior content executive bets a large sum on an unproven creator against the instinct of the executive team. The informed captain model says she makes the call. The bet pays off. That story is canonical inside Netflix. It's used to reinforce that junior people make 8-figure decisions, and senior people resist the urge to override them.
Let's talk about sunshining, because this is the one that comes up directly in the most common interview question. Tell me about a failure.
Sunshining is the Netflix discipline of publicly owning failures in writing. What was decided? Why? What was learned? The canonical example in the book is the 2011 Quickster debacle. Netflix briefly tried to split its DVD and streaming businesses, reversed it within weeks, and Hastings wrote a public memo owning the mistake fully.
And the logic is that if the CEO sunshines his mistakes, everyone else has permission to.
That's exactly it. And for the interview, the shape of your failure answer should mirror that. Name the mistake precisely. Take ownership without making excuses. Describe the post-mortem. Identify the specific change you made afterward. Don't hide behind euphemism. Don't blame teammates.
The third act is Erin Meyer's territory, taking this model global. And this is not a soft culture chapter. She's very rigorous.
Her framework from the culture map uses several dimensions: communicating, which is direct versus indirect, with the Netherlands and Israel at the direct end, and Japan and Indonesia at the indirect end; evaluating, which is how directly negative feedback is delivered; trusting, which is task-based versus relationship-based; and disagreeing, which is confrontational versus conflict-avoiding.
And the Netflix Tokyo office is the case study that makes it concrete.
In Los Angeles, you might give someone feedback in passing in a corridor. In Tokyo, that same feedback had to be scheduled formally, written down, framed as a request rather than a critique, delivered in private. The 4A model was preserved, the delivery channel was adapted.
Which is a really important distinction. The principle travels, the mechanics adapt.
And Amsterdam had the opposite problem. Dutch directness was so far past American directness that the American colleagues were initially shocked. The fix was to set explicit expectations about which cultural calibration each office was operating from.
Let's spend a minute on the critiques, because I think walking in with only the hagiographic version of this book is actually a mistake.
It is, and the book takes some of them seriously. The biggest one is survivor bias. The stunning colleagues you meet at Netflix are the ones who survived the keeper test. The ones who didn't aren't in the photos. Attrition data tells a more complex story.
Then there's the industry specificity problem.
This model works for creative and software work where individual output varies enormously, and innovation is the dominant value. It works less well, maybe not at all, for manufacturing, aviation, healthcare delivery, where reliability and process discipline dominate. Hastings acknowledges this in the book.
And the pay model is hard to imitate if you're not Netflix scale.
That's a real one. Most companies that try to copy Netflix borrow the rhetoric and skip the compensation, which gives you the worst of both worlds, high accountability culture without the offsetting pay. That produces resentment, not engagement.
And candor is genuinely hard in practice.
The 4A model is a clean theory. Most people, in most cultures, struggle to deliver hard feedback well. Netflix invests heavily in training and modeling it. Companies that bolt candor on without that investment usually end up with veiled hostility rather than selfless honesty.
So when the interviewer asks, "What don't you like about Netflix's culture?" naming one of those trade-offs honestly is exactly the right move.
It signals you've engaged with the argument rather than memorized it. Interviewers tend to respond very well to that. Pandering is the opposite of what that question is testing for.
If someone's got 2 days before their Netflix interview, what are the terms they absolutely need to own fluently?
Talent density, the keeper test, selfless candor, the 4A model, sunshining, farm-for-dissent, disagree and commit, informed captain, lead with context not control, top of market, pro sports team not family, live and written 360s, and Meyer's culture map dimensions, communicating, evaluating, trusting, disagreeing.
And it's not about dropping the vocabulary. It's about using it accurately in the right moment.
Right. And the interview itself is the first instance of the culture. The interviewer is watching whether you're direct, whether you push back on a poorly framed question, whether your stories are specific, team size, dollar figures, timelines. Netflix culture rewards information density, not word count.
The goal isn't to perform the culture. It's to come in already at home in it.
That's the whole thesis of the book applied to the interview. If you've internalized this, the conversation stops feeling like an evaluation and starts feeling like two colleagues who already share a language.
If you read one book as if your next job depended on it, this is the one, and now you know exactly why every word of it matters.